That's Benjamin Schroeder, and he'll be up in a second. And to facilitate the conversation, we have Erica Dingman. And so why don't you join me in welcoming Erica and Benjamin to the stage.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Erica Dingman. I'm on the product marketing team. And I am lucky enough to work on DaVinci, the product you guys have heard so much about already. In my day-to-day, I get to work with Benjamin Schroeder over here, VP of Machine Learning, as well as our product managers and our go-to-market teams to scale our AI capabilities. So today we're going to be discussing all things personalization and all things AI, so I do want to dive right in. Benjamin, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, I do want to say I'm really excited to be here. This is my very first Think Summit, and it's been like a pretty incredible event so far. I am, like many people in this field, a researcher by training. So I was an academic, which I guess is another way of saying I went to school for a very long time. I originally wanted to become a professor, pursue research, a career in research. I did a PhD. Towards the end of that, found out it's not really my thing. There are too many things that I didn't like. So I started exploring and ended up in industry where luckily I found, there's a lot of research problems as well.
Yeah, there's definitely still a lot of problems that need solving. So how did you actually make that pivot from academic to marketer?
Yeah, it may sound strange, but it's actually a true story. So like I met this person at a wedding and, we started talking and, he told me after some probing of like kind of what are the things that I'm doing, et cetera, is like, oh, you should do performance marketing for the company that I work for. And I had no idea what that actually meant, but I kind of said like, sure, I don't, why not explore it? And I'm like very learning driven, so I went for that, and that's actually how I got into modeling business problems. Which is something that I approach it very much from the lens of, okay, here's something that I need to do practically to solve something. What I was doing is I actually started as a channel manager. So I was managing budgets for paid acquisition on Google, Facebook, where you have to make like all these bidding decisions. And so I started building models for that. That way I got deeper into becoming sort of specialized on modeling business problems and the engineering of the systems that you need to make these kinds of decisions at scale in a highly automated way, and eventually landed in search and recommendations. So did some time basically building search engines. And that's how I also got into personalization and landed at Movable Inc. eventually.
Yeah, well, the world of search and recommendations isn't so different from personalizing and email marketing.
Yeah, that's right.
And so it would make sense that you would land at a place like Movable Inc., especially because Movable Inc. has been tackling the personalization challenge for well over a decade. Do you need some help?
I think I figured it out.
I don't think I have to tell anyone in this room, but we all know that a lot has changed recently with the rise of AI, particularly around generative AI. So I'm curious, what do you think about the opportunity for businesses with the rise of AI?
Yeah, I think it is pretty significant in that, if you think of creative production, that tends to still be a very manual thing in many places, and something that's basically bounded by human labor, right? And so now with the rise of like text generation, image generation, and the rapid gains in quality that those have made, I do think there's like a tremendous opportunity to just basically scale this significantly. And you'll say like, oh, but there are some ways that you can do this already. And for example, if you do display retargeting or our very own studio as maybe a more curated version of this, you can do a lot with like data feeds, templating, etc. But there's sort of this thing that's missing, which is like this bridge to something that has like a very curated storytelling look and feel to it, which I think that the promise of generative AI is that you could get to a state where you can actually do those things entirely machine-based.
Okay, well, there are still some limitations, right? Like I know from a consumer point of view, like if you play around with a tool like ChatGPT, it's still pretty common to get some hallucination back, or like you're trying to generate an image of a person and that person has 6 fingers, right? There's still a lot of errors. So how can we expect businesses to really use generative AI in a meaningful way?
Yeah, I always chuckle a little bit when I hear hallucination because, when I built a bidding model that just didn't make some of its predictions weren't very good, we would just say like, well, some of its predictions aren't very good. We would never have said, oh, the model is hallucinating. But, going back to that, yeah, I think there's sort of, I think you're absolutely right, and I would have like 3 thoughts on that. The first one being, there's a difference in sort of the modalities. So meaning what we can do for text today, I think is much better than what we can do for images, right? So what you would expect to see is probably that there's, a lot more products that are already hitting the market and, where there's going to be rapid innovation around them, and then, a weeding out of like the ones that stick, et cetera, around text much earlier than imagery. Imagery indeed is going to be a little trickier, and it's hard to tell on what time scale we would get there, right? And so the second thought I would have is that a lot of these products, the way they're going to look like is more like human-in-the-loop kind of system. So meaning, you do the generation, but you will have to have like a very thorough and good QA function built into it so that, for an enterprise use case where you have a certain bar for, what is it that your brand wants to put out there, et cetera, you have those controls, right? And then the third one is, and that's one that, fewer people think of, I think today, which is, okay, so now let's say I can go from, a creative production of like tens or hundreds of creatives to like tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands. Now you actually get into a decisioning problem. Like, how do I use them? Like, what do I do with them? That's a massive scale of decisions that you suddenly have to make.
Well, I want to first address what you said about human in the loop, because I think we heard Vivek say it yesterday, the marketer in the loop. We've talked a lot about the machine and marketer partnership. And it's just such a core principle of what we're doing here at Movable Inc. Like, the machine is very powerful, but it's really only as powerful as the marketer behind it, setting the strategy, the controls, monitoring, intervening as necessary. So it's just sort of good to hear that we're aligned. But I also want to address what you said about essentially just generating assets and kind of releasing them out into the abyss. Like, if we don't have a way to either match them up with customers or measure their effectiveness, again, what is a business supposed to do?
Right. Yeah, and I think that's where, my maybe not so surprising answer, given my business title here, would be to, it's going to be more machine learning, actually, and but it's going to look very different because, a ChatGPT or Midjourney by itself, it doesn't actually tell you anything about like how good is this thing going to be, right? And so it's going to be more specialized applications that figure out that piece, and that's something where actually, that has a longer history. So that's actually been ongoing for quite some time, and it's something that people may not be as familiar with when you think about AI as like the ChatGPT thing. But rather that these types of techniques, and that's why I tend to talk about machine learning more so than about AI, is actually something that has been powering kind of decision making for a long time.
Yeah, I think I'm sort of guilty of that, really not understanding how AI was in marketing, maybe kind of knowing in the back of my head that it was, but not paying as much attention to it until the rise of tools like ChatGPT and Midjourney, where it all really went mainstream. And I think some of that is due to the fact that AI being a part of optimization and decision making, it's sort of under the hood. If you don't have that AI background, it's hard to understand how it applies, especially when you can do those things in a rules-based environment as well. So maybe it would be helpful if you gave an example of how machine learning actually helps the optimization and decisioning process.
Yeah, and this is, in many ways, this is at least like reflects my own personal story of like doing marketing optimization, and many teams will probably have gone through a similar like sequence of things. So let's imagine you actually don't have any models to optimize your stuff. So you start with something very simple. You have like your channel, and that might be a retargeting channel, email or so. And you have your pool of assets, so you come up with a rule set for sending out these assets, and the first thing you do is you start measuring, right? Like you want to start getting a sense of what performs well and what doesn't. And the very first thing you do is like you measure at the level of each asset, like how well is it performing? Like, how many clicks is it driving? How many conversions is it driving? And then, you find out, I don't know, there's like these swimming pigs in the Bahamas, and they do like really,
what
really
are
well.
swimming pigs in the Bahamas?
You don't know those?
No. Is anyone here familiar with swimming? Oh, more than well, I don't know. I don't know what they are.
There's like this beach in the Bahamas. I've never been myself. I totally want to go, but it's beautiful. It's like white sand beach, crystal clear water. But then there's this weird thing. There's these feral pigs. They live on the beach and they literally swim in the water. So it makes like for very engaging imagery, right? Because it's something that you expect with something that you don't expect, and it looks like awfully cute. So
a way to capture customer
exactly.
attention.
Yeah, exactly. And so those are the kinds of things that you'll start finding out. And so you send that to your list, and so you can start shifting to like, okay, let me send more of those things that perform well. But you'll soon realize like, okay, well, but the Bahamas aren't for everyone, right? Not everyone likes the tropics, the hot temperature, et cetera. So sticking to the world that you can control with like rules, you'll start thinking of a segmentation strategy, right?
Sure.
So yeah, the idea would be like, you figure out, okay, there's different interest groups on my list, and then, you have a diverse asset pool. You figure out kind of associations of, determining which assets to send to who. You'll add A/B testing to it to kind of figure out like what performs better and better and better and so on. And typically what you'll see is like, yeah, you can drive more performance that way, but typically what you'll also see is the complexity of your program suddenly becomes enormous, like it explodes on you.
Okay, so maybe another example besides swimming pigs is like if you're Netflix, you're serving Bridgerton. Most popular show, millions of people are watching, but as popular as it is, I'm sure 100% of their subscribers are not tuning into Bridgerton. Like, you don't strike me as a Bridgerton fan.
That's right.
Maybe more of a David Attenborough guy with this feral pigs example. So it's up to Netflix to figure out, rather than serving the most popular content, they have to figure out exactly how to serve relevant content to every single subscriber. And one of the problems that comes up with getting more and more granular is that it's harder to scale, certainly, like the human labor that goes into that, it's very time consuming, and it's definitely harder to manage. So that's where AI can really benefit you. You get the scale, but you also gain operational efficiency.
Yeah, exactly. And so the reason, I walk kind of through that whole journey is because it gives you a very intuitive way to think about like what these models do. And you can think of it as kind of just like a logical extension of like you go more granular and more granular, and you try to figure out like, from what's the most popular per segment to eventually what's the most popular for you individually, right? And so kind of machine learning allows you to model these things at a level of complexity that you just couldn't do as a human. But you can really think of it as basically constructing these rule sets in like more and more granularity. And it does it in a very automated way. It does it with very good performance guarantees, because you can literally, train these. When we say we train a model, right, what we're really constructing is sort of a mathematical optimization that just says like, okay, well, you want to figure out like what is the thing that I want to show to each individual customer, and you're saying like, well, my decisioning criterion should be, I want the most conversions, and it'll give you that, right? And so that's like, a very beautiful thing, because you get sort of this win-win of you create a better customer experience and you get better financial performance.
Yeah, okay, that all makes sense. But I do want to come back to generative
Right.
AI, because when we ask the question, like, how is a business supposed to use it effectively, generating is only half the battle.
Right.
So is there a world in which we use generative with machine learning together?
Yeah, exactly. And what my argument would be is you kind of have to, right? Because going from, a pool of 10 or hundreds of things that you might be able to show, now imagine you generate like tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands, right? Then like how do you make decisions on that? Like it should be obvious. It's not easy to do that with a segmentation approach, right? So you kind of actually need the optimization at the tail end of it, which is able to then basically ingest this imagery and figure out kind of, okay, what's the content of these images? Like, how does this particular asset relate to this other particular asset? How do they relate to customers based on their behavior, et cetera? So, for it to actually be something that you can use operationally, you kind of actually need both sides of it.
Okay, and where does this fall between like reality today and vision?
Yeah, that's a very hard question. So I think it was about 2 years ago, or even less than 2 years ago, that first like ChatGPT burst onto the scene. And I did a fair bit of language modeling myself before, because in search, that's kind of what you do. You take sort of the search string and you figure out based on that, like, what are the things that you should be showing. And I would not have thought what would be possible. And if I had like talked along my colleagues and we weren't super familiar or like didn't have any inside knowledge on what was cooking at OpenAI or so, like we heard the story of this Google engineer who was claiming that they had built something sentient in Google, and we were all like, that guy must be crazy. And then ChatGPT happened, and we were all like stunned. So I'm saying that because it's very hard to predict these things. I would say the conservative side of me would be like, well, what we're likely going to see emerge is more kind of like hybrid things, where you will start seeing some parts of what you're doing, like some parts of your product being powered by generative AI, again, like with strict guardrails around what it can and can't do. But who knows? Maybe in 3 months I'll be proven wrong, and it's just there and possible for everyone to use.
Yeah, I mean, innovation happens in fits and starts, but it's nice to know we more or less have a guidepost in terms of personalization.
Yeah.
But who knows, maybe sentient robots are next.
Yeah, I will also say, like, in my kind of like maximum likelihood estimate, to put it in those terms, would be it's going to be a journey, right, where you get there bit by bit. And I think that's a very exciting thing. Like, at least I'm personally very excited about going onto that journey.
Oh, yeah, it's definitely exciting.
Yeah.
Well, with that, Benjamin, thank you so much for speaking with me today. I know I got a lot out of this conversation. I hope you all did as well. If you're feeling inspired by what we talked about today, or you do have any questions, don't hesitate to approach either one of us after, and we can keep the conversation going. So thank you again.
Yeah, thank you for having me.